The Super Pershing just got buffed massively within World of Tanks, and we're taking a look at how this tank now performs in the game. It's one of the oldest premium tanks that has been in World of Tanks console, and it is a tank that was pretty much in a bit of a stale position. Most of the time the Super Pershing was just one of those tanks you kind of just load premium for and auto pen through the upper plate, even though the fact that it has so much spaced armor you probably shouldn't be able to do that, you were. But with the current meta and the actual changes that Wargaming have made, and those changes include increasing the horsepower of the tank and just making it a little bit faster, which was the key weakness of the Super Pershing. Effectively, you were always so slow. Then this tank has now become pretty good, and what we've got is fuel in the tank. We probably shouldn't take fuel because it's probably not that much of a benefit. But nonetheless, we took fuel and we're going to take advantage of the game as it stands here. And now, the key thing about the Super Pershing is, of course, the kind of the turret armor, and of course the frontal armor. You don't have any armor in the side, so don't even think that you're going to be able to bounce any rounds from the side of the tank, and that's because it is a Pershing after all, which is the tier 8 non-premium version. It is the tech tree tank, and it is a medium tank, so you're effectively a medium tank that's basically got a load of spaced armor over the front of it, making it somewhat hard for opponents to be able to pen you. So the Super Pershing definitely is in a very good position, as we kind of just meme that guy that was sat in the bush there. We didn't even actually fully aim down the scope and we just launched around into him. Now, we've taken the central position on Hidden Village here, and that means that we can kind of get some shots into the opponents that are kind of sat camping in the base, and they're usually TDs. Now, we do spot the Brumbar here, who's making his way around to the side, and that is a tank you definitely don't want to get hit by in the Pershing, since the medium tank armor of the side and the rear of this tank is terrible, and I mean terrible. You are going to get penned by the majority of tanks if they manage to get any of your side armor, and that's where the Super Pershing kind of has one of its key weak points, and that is why I typically don't particularly like playing in a engagement where you can get hit from multiple flanks, where you have the potential to be hit from multiple different areas. But nonetheless, what we're doing here is pushing out damage onto the poor little tier 7's Czech heavy that's obviously probably stock, to be honest with you, since this was recorded just about when they got released. So yeah, I feel bad for that guy, but nonetheless, we are able to bounce a lot of rounds, and this is where the Super Pershing is so much fun, because most medium tanks or most heavies don't usually bounce that many, and because the Super Pershing almost has like, not, I'm going to say idiot-proof armor, because essentially the armor model works when you are facing exactly directly front on to your opponents, which means you don't have to angle, you don't really have to think too much about it, and therefore, you know, you don't have to be too clever to make this tank work, which is ultimately what you want from a tank. You don't want to have to be doing all of the extra stuff to make a tank work properly, but this one definitely makes it easy for players that are going to be playing against it. Now, you'll notice we've picked up 1800, make that 2000 damage within this game, but we've also bounced so many rounds, and that's because, you know, of the armor model. Like we've talked about, it is just so simple. You just keep your frontal armor towards the opponents that are going to be fighting you, and you will do well in this tank. And when you're coming up against tanks like the T23E3, which is of course the free tank for May and the May challenge in World of Tanks, you can basically never get penned, because that tank has such little penetration that they're never going to be able to just go straight through the upper plate of this tank. Therefore, like, they're probably not going to be able to go through you very easily, which means that if you keep your frontal armor towards them, there's no chance. Now, the cupolas on top of the Super Pershing are a weak point, and I'm not going to pretend like they're not, and that's because that part of the tank is going to get penned all of the time. If people aim at the topper place of this vehicle, then yeah, you do get penned very consistently, and so you have to be aware of that. Now, you can see here, firing on the move, probably not the best idea in the Super Pershing, but ultimately you can still do it. And you can see here what we're trying to do is just get hold down, and one thing that you should know is that when you're playing the Super Pershing, what you don't want to do is angle your tank down a slope like we're doing right here. I'm only doing it just for the sheer like shots onto the T23, since it's probably not going to pen, and you just saw what happens. People start aiming at that top plate weight of this tank to be able to pen you, and so that's the one kind of weak point like we've talked about. And the thing is, with the Super Pershing, since it is so fast now, it becomes harder for people to pinpoint that weak point because of the fact that you can move and you can readjust and you can swivel and do all of these extra things now with the Super Pershing that you previously just had no chance of doing. And that is why you're able to block more damage and deal more damage and be more mobile, which is pretty much everything that the Super Pershing kind of lacked previously to the buff to its horsepower. So this tank, now that it is buffed, is actually so much fun to play, and I really do recommend, if you haven't already got the Super Pershing and you haven't actually, or alternatively if you haven't played the Super Pershing in a while, that you jump into it, put on some of the speed boost equipment, make sure that you got vert stabs, some of the extras, and just use it like a very aggressive heavy and play it like a traditional heavy where you're keeping your frontal armor towards your opponent, dishing out damage, and just using the medium tank style gun on the thing to be able to just pump out damage on your opponents. And the Super Pershing is so much fun, and that is why ultimately I love playing it, and that might be why I particularly enjoy using this tank. And also, remember, it's a preferential matchmaking tank, so there is no +2, -2, it is always +1, -1. So for those of you hoping that you want +1, -1 in the matchmaking forever, then this preferential matchmaker is exactly what you're asking for, and it is a very, very good tank, and yeah, really, really fun to play. I've always enjoyed the Super Pershing, even though it was pretty bad at one point, but you can see here 3,600 damage done and 3,040 damage blocked. The Super Pershing is so much better now. Let's have a look at another replay before we end it off. Now, the next replay that we have today is on steps, and this is a really good map for the Super Pershing. That's because essentially what you can do is you can get hold down in a lot of positions, and you can also make it very difficult for that top turret weak point of those two cupolas on the top of the tank for the opponents to even be able to hit them. And because that's when you're using your gun depression on a hill, of course you're looking down, and that means that they're looking up into your cupolas, which makes it a very slim angle to be able to pen you. And so that is why I think that the Super Pershing can be very deadly in this sort of position where you're seeing me take the Super right now. Of course, what we do have is a 50 TP who's gone into a bit of an annoying position, I'm not going to lie, when you're playing against them in this sort of area, because when they side scrape and stuff like that, it can be painful. But luckily some of our teammates have kind of moved up into the frontal position, which means that that position basically gets nullified, and you can see us putting a couple rounds into the Bog Horror here. The VZ44-1 is sat out in the open, so we'll take him out of the game very easily, and now we can just fight it out with a Bog Horror who's going to find it very difficult to pen us, at least consistently, and we're trying to go for that weak point of the Bog Horror. Of course, we could go for the turret weak point of the Bog, which is that kind of minute cupola, but we're just going to track him in place, and hopefully we'll just be able to help out our team to be able to get that damage on him. The Tiger in the background, that is of course stock, is a easy pen for us. We're not going to have any trouble with him, to be honest. And of course you can see that the majority of the enemy team's forces have come this way, so that's a good result for us in this sort of scenario. That's because effectively they're not going to be capping, and I hate capping, and I hate losing to cap on this map because it seems to happen all the time. A lot of the time some of the enemy teams will just YOLO into the cap, and then you just lose because everyone's YOLO'd in the cap, which is no surprise. And yeah, it's just boring, and you end up with like 0 XP anyway, even if you win the game by cap in that sort of scenario. But what we're doing here is kind of being careful, because of course what we talked about in the first replay is that you don't want to give the opponents any of your side armor. And that's what we're trying here, is just to avoid being hit from multiple directions. And you can see us just trying to move around this Alpine Tiger as we go forward, and now it's time to just go after the AT-7, or alternatively this this French heavy tank who is sat right out in the open, and he's made the fatal error of just coming out in front of all of the opponents on our team, which I'm not going to complain about, but he definitely could have saved himself some hit points there by just staying where he was. But In all essences, we have the AT7 there that gets taken out very easily, and in this sort of scenario the Super Pershing is almost like a king. You just can go, and there's no real negatives of you pushing forward, because you know you can output your damage really quickly, and it's often when you're in an aggressive position that the damage per minute becomes really good for the Super Pershing. So you can just go, and even against tanks like the Bar, like the Super Pershing is a nightmare for the Bar, because spaced armor and HE do not go intertwined. So yeah, there's no real problems for us here against that tank, and there'd be very little chance of him penning unless he of course got the side armor or our engine deck somehow. And there you go, a very quick round of World of Tanks where we were just able to smash out a load of damage really quickly, and unfortunately we're trying to get this M53, can't get a shot on him, and the TNH on our team picks him up anyway. And then that is the end of the game, a very quick round of World of Tanks, and of course that is what we're aiming to do. I'm coming up to the victory screen in just a second here, and there we go. We've dealt 2,782 damage in that replay, 522 assistance, which is nice as well, since the Super Pershing doesn't have the worst view range in the game, and with a match that literally lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds, you can see that the speed boost definitely gets you into a position where you can dish out damage pretty quickly, and you can be the one in those 15-0 games that you're the one on the forefront and not the one sat at the back trying to get forward to get some damage in their game. But there we go, hopefully you guys enjoyed the Super Pershing. And of course, if you don't actually own it, I would recommend it. It's really cheap to be able to actually pick up if you're wanting to spend money on it, or alternatively, if you already have it, I would recommend you test it out again and give it a go. But thanks very much for watching. Of course, check out this video on the left, which looks at the King Dragon, and on the right hand side we have the gameplay and tank reviews playlist, which showcases loads of different tanks. I think we have over 100 different replays of different tanks in that playlist. So thank you very much for watching. Subscribe if you aren't already, and I'll see you there. Goodbye.